Who called me sir, man? Okay, don't scare me. Right. So, okay. I'm sorry. I'm not really the kind of guy who can prepare slides and other things. And even if I did, I would probably have just one slide, and it wouldn't be any of any use. So I'll use my session proposal, the outline, as probably the outline, and we'll talk about these things. And I was planning to do it more as a workshop, so where we do things rather than talk about them. But I think we'll do a mix of both. If you can, probably I would not end up doing something. So Drupal or outside? How many of you? I do not know what's the ratio of developers in the audience, etc. How many of you have used web services? How many of you started doing so only since the last year? Those who have done it, typical age, you could just shout out. How long before did you start using web services ever? So probably you're building software for 5 years or so. Yeah.
2 years now.
Okay. Others?
1 year.
Others?
4 years.
Okay, good. So he is probably better qualified. I would give you the perspective of a guy who was scared of web services, and I'll tell you the reason for it. So my association with Drupal is long, very old. This is part of, by the way, introduction for the noobs, and I count myself as a noob. I'm no web services expert, but I was able to accomplish good. I was able to build good stuff. I mean, which others, people working for 4 or 5 years using web services, were able to probably. And that's the power of Drupal. You do not have to be an expert of each subject. It empowers you to build interesting things. So that's the focus of my talk. The focus is to help other people who were afraid of web services for some reason. I'll tell you what my reason was, and empowering them to do very interesting stuff using Drupal, because it's so easy and interesting. So I used to work with Drupal for about 6 years now. I've been working with Drupal for about 6 years now, but I never really had a sort of requirement where I had to build something around web services. We'll talk about what web services are. In between, I worked for IBM, Amazon, and other places. And at IBM, I don't know how they end up making every 50% of their software, at least the ones that I was exposed to, they used web services very heavily, and these were scary. So there were some requests and responses which were large XML files running into MBs, and people would edit it by hand, etc. And there would be errors that kind of errors would come up, and people would not know how to deal with it. So I had friends who worked on projects where web services was a big component, and their life sucked. They were looking at XML files all day, and I was like, so that was my idea of working with web services. I knew the funda behind it, क्या काम करता है, कैसे करता है, but I thought कि it's pretty boring work and pretty non-rewarding, boring per se. What are web services? I would not probably give you a technical definition. It's basically two software components talking together, and these could be very different from each other. They're talking together by a commonly agreed upon standard. This is not the definition you would find on Wikipedia or something. Maybe you would. To me, web services are two separate components of a single software, or two completely different. I don't know. They could be lying anywhere around, but they talk to each other in a standardized pre-agreed format. And allowing this interoperability on network is web services for me. So there are standards around it. So there is a standardized part to it. How does a component A talk to component B on completely two different locations, one built in Drupal, another built in probably Java? So there are certain standards. This happens through message exchange. So there are requests and responses. A says to B, hi, I need this. I need the weather data of Delhi. There is a weather department system, and it has a web service exposed, provider and a consumer. Consumer says hi to the provider, I need following things in a particular format, and the provider gives you the data. So these standards are different. There is SOAP, REST and SOAP. So there are predefined XML structures. How there's a request tag, there are parameters, and you form a request, an XML request, and you have a endpoint URL address, target address. You send this request to this endpoint, and it returns you an XML in response. What I like, I do not like SOAP that much. I like HTTP, web services over HTTP request. So you basically send a HTTP request. If you have small amount of data, you tag it along with the request, or you put it in a body, a post body in a request, and you get HTTP responses back, or you could just get JSON responses back, which I like. So there are pre-agreed standards, and there are many of them. Google APIs, all of them are sort of web services. I think you already use it. To me, I don't know, it could be technically wrong. To me, all the Twitter APIs exposed are web services. So if I'm building a Twitter client which can pull in tweets of a particular hashtag or do something or them or something, I'm basically writing a web services consumer source. So that's the introduction. What were we going to talk about next? Building APIs. The scenario where I have used web services, and probably you would too, most commonly coming up scenario these days, according to me, is mobile is seeing increasingly higher adoption. So people build mobile applications, right? I built one, helped build one, and these mobile applications, native mobile applications do not run inside the browser. So you have a website, Facebook ho gaya, aapka Twitter ho gaya, you are interacting with a centralized server, your data is exchanging, is moving over machines, is being persisted, kahin save ho raha hai, you are interacting with a system and an interface. On a browser it is possible, you do not have to worry about web services, but when you are writing native mobile applications, if they have to talk to a server to save data, to fetch data, to perform a certain operation, mostly passing along messages and data, there you have to use web services. There is a high component of using web services. You can make network calls from a native application, and these network calls are basically calls to your web service providers. Using Drupal, you can create these web service providers. You can also create web service consumers, which is pretty easy. It's just sending a request and doing something with the response. Creating web service providers is an interesting part, where you accept, I'm so sorry, this is bad. That's my phone. Yep. It won't bother us anymore. So yeah, creating web service providers is a more scarier part, or at least it was earlier. So when you're building mobile applications, you can use ready to use. We'll now go jump into Drupal straight away. So Drupal has there's a saying in Drupal which goes like, there must be a module for it. So if you have a problem and you talk to a Drupaler about it, even if he does not know the solution, he would say to you, there must be a module about it, and he most likely would be right. So when you're talking about web services, there are modules around it, and the module that you must use if you have to use web services in Drupal is the services module. So, okay, not all. So the others who have not installed Drupal modules, you have probably heard about in the course of the day today how there are modules in Drupal they provide specific functionality, basically allow you to extend Drupal so that your Drupal site or installation can do new things. There are modules that allow your users to log in through Facebook. There are modules that allow you to build queries via an interface. There is a module that allows you to very easily implement and consume web services. Consuming is independent of this module. Implementing is providing web services is enabled very easily by this module. I mean, I have not built web services, to be honest, in any other system. But this is pretty straightforward. It's like declaring a structured array. That's about it, and a callback. We'll see that. So what you do is, over here we have, you just throw this module in. So this is my site, and there are many other modules you see here. I'm scrolling on top. There are, I'm sorry, pardon me, I'll be going through all this for the benefit of a larger section of the audience here, those who are not aware. So in your modules directory, you place these module folders, you place the services module folder. When you do that and you log in into your Drupal site as an administrator, you go to the modules page, you would see a new module there, services. It's already turned on here, so you just turn it on. When you turn it on, it gives you a services configuration page. And by default, it gives you X number of services already exposed. Most commonly ones, say I have a mobile application, let's say Instagram. So you decide to build Instagram, and I am a Drupal guy. I do not know how to write an Android application, and you are an Android developer. and you know how to use the Android Java SDK, Android SDK basically the Java interface, and you write an Instagram UI. So when the app is opened up, on the first page you see a username and password field, and people are supposed to enter their username and password, and this data will go to the Instagram servers. This is a native application, by the way, because there is camera integration and all that. So this data has to go to the server will authenticate the user and return something back, and in all the subsequent requests where you click a picture and you want to apply a filter, and you will upload it, and it will go Instagram ke server pe chali jayegi, and from there people can share it, etc. Right? So you are transferring data, you are authenticating to the server. Now, we are talking about Drupal here. Drupal has an inbuilt user system in it. Drupal has certain core systems: node for content, user for users, mod, menu for routing. So there are certain core components. Because users is a core component, when you turn on the services module, some web service endpoints are already created for you. You don't have to write the code for them. And most of them are around the core Drupal systems already present. So around the user system, you have a login and logout endpoint. Let's just search for services module here and see how it looks like. So I've just turned on services module. You go to, when you do that, you go to structure, you go to services. This item appears when you turn on the module, and imagine this scenario. So you have not worked with web services, but probably you have worked with Google APIs, Twitter APIs. So they have their versions, right? Imagine a scenario where there is one system which is exposing 10 of its functionality through web services. So I am saying I am a software, I am an Instagram server, and I can handle photos, I can authenticate users, and I can allow them to upload photos here using their mobile phones. So I can do certain operations, and I'm creating a gateway for others to use these services via web services. When I do that, I would define the interface. I would say you have to say hi to me like this, and you have to pass me this data. For a photo, you have to pass me the photo, you have to tell me what filter to apply. And you have to, for every request, you have to tell me who you are. You have to send an authentication cookie along with it. For the first request, probably you will have to send a username and password. So I'll dictate what the endpoint is. Where would you connect? What door will you knock? And when you knock the door, what ingredients will you present to me so that I present to you the output? That's like defining the interface. So web services have an interface defined. Very often, this interface changes. So you have multiple versions. Google and you do not deprecate the previous version. Web services, the way I see modern day ubiquitous use of web services is to this end, to provide APIs to your existing software so that they can talk together. Now around this, you would want to create a new version of your API, where for, say, uploading a photo, you are accepting now different kind of data, but you do not want to deprecate your previous API, previous version. So to accommodate this, Drupal 7 Services 3, Drupal Major version 7 and Services Module Major version 3. This was not the case in Major version 2. In 3, you have something called, you can create a new resource, a new service resource. So I have created one here called GAUS. You know, I could call it, for easier understanding, I could call it V1. Say that's my version 1. And under this resource, I will have all my endpoints. So imagine doing the login operation is an endpoint. There will be a door where you will knock and you will present the username and the password, and login would happen. There would be another door that you would knock and present a photograph, and it will be uploaded. So all these doors are called endpoints. Together, all these endpoints, I can wrap them in a resource. So, and on the same Drupal website, I can have 10 different resources, and they can have their own versions of endpoints which are accepting different inputs and giving you different outputs. So they can coexist. This coexistence, 2 versions of a login endpoint were not present in services 2. So this was a new thing introduced. So you could just play around with it. It's as simple as this. So far, we are not writing any code, right? We just turned on the services module. We landed on this page. Earlier, there were no resources here. In this particular site, there is one. I click on add and just give around a name. When you do that, you also tell this resource what kind of interface would it accept. So server. Wait a minute. Why isn't this here? We'll check on that. I think I need to turn on another module. Server here. Okay, I need to check up on the server bit. So anyway, you give a name to a resource like we have done here, and you give a path endpoint to identify this resource. The name could be for your reference. This will appear in the URL. If I am making a HTTP based service, this will appear in the URL. So my site.com / this path to the endpoint pointing to this resource Gauss. This particular project example is called Gauss, and followed by login or get data or upload photo. So my endpoint, HTTP endpoint, if I use API as the path, would look something like site.com /API /login, and it would expect certain input and give you certain output or an error message. Very interesting. Okay. The most challenging bit that I found when working on web services in Drupal, which was a while ago when I started, was the documentation is tricky at places or absent at places. And it is us who should help improve it. I'll probably start doing that. So, and there were days when I had come across bugs which were so simple to fix. It was as easy as clicking a certain buttons around, but there was no documentation. So when I create a new resource, I could tell you whether this resource would expect authenticated requests or not. For example, if I tell this particular set of endpoints, if I check this box, I say session authentication is a must. Drupal would take this additional step. Whenever a request comes in, Drupal would check, because we are talking about HTTP requests. Drupal would check if the request header has a session cookie in it. If it has, this is how Drupal works. This is how every application works, which provides you sessions, persistent sessions, because HTTP is sessionless, right? So you give your username and your password, you authenticate to the system, it returns you back a cookie, your browsers save the cookie, and outside web services, within the browser, this is automatically done for you. All the requests that you, subsequent requests that you send to that particular domain, the cookie is already attached in the header. Drupal receives the cookie and checks it against the sessions table, and it knows that, okay, this guy has already logged in, and it loads your account, and it knows what access you have, everything else. In web services, that's not the case. Web services are made by hand or by systems, but they are not, browsers would not attach a cookie automatically to them. So if my application, the producing end, this is, by creating a resource here, I'm creating a web service provider, an endpoint from where you can pull in data. So the consumers, when they send requests, it's their choice, it's their use case whether they want to attach a session cookie to it or not. So if my use case governs that all requests would be authenticated, or majority of them would be, or even one of them would be, probably I would check this box. When I do this, Drupal will take this additional step that every request that comes in, it will look for that cookie. If present, it will load the corresponding user account who has a session active against that particular session cookie. This bit is not really well documented at some places. So now, there are certain tabs on top. The edit tab allowed me to change my API endpoint, etc. Authentication, there's nothing there. Server, okay, I don't know what's going on here. I'll probably check the modules page. So there are multiple options here. Because I was talking about services, web services, they have different standards of communication. So that was the server bit. It's been a while since I worked on it. Okay, none of them are turned on. This should be, or HTTP is default. You do not need to turn on servers, probably. Now, when I go to the resources tab, this is where you would see what we are calling endpoints, or what in a noob language, my own language, I was describing as doors that we knock. Many such doors are already available to us. So this door here, user, I didn't create this. Under user, I have something like retrieve, create, update, delete, index, login, logout, register. And if I need to look up their documentation, what data do they expect, I just need to turn them on. So probably if I click here, all these web services are turned on for me. Now, web services, this endpoint is publicly visible. For some reason, maybe I do not want my endpoint to look like site.com/API/user/login. I don't want it to appear that way. If that is the case, I could change the alias here. So instead of user, I could call something else. Instead of user, I could say member. You could write aliases for pre-existing endpoints. And you could do that for your own created endpoints as well. So node related, file related, many endpoints are already created for you, and they are pretty well documented. You can look up the module itself, and there is a test file in it which tells you what data does it expect. Example plugins. It was probably test. Do you see something like a test here? Services, test, unit test. Services, test resources. Sorry, there you go. This is where you can see how to implement your own web services, web service endpoints basically. You are already aware of all the components. So again, in very layman terms, say Instagram's example, right now, this does not provide me, the Drupal by default does not provide me an endpoint to upload images per se. How do I create one? What are the things that I need? I mean, forget about what code we will write. English में बात करते हैं. What are the things we'll need? We'll need a door. We'll need a place where all my requests should come to, the requests which are trying to upload a picture. So we need a door. We need a way to identify this door. So we need a label. I mean, there are many lecture halls here. So you need a label to identify it. So we need a name for it. And then we need to tell prospective requests coming in, what do you need to bring along? So we need a way to tell them that I am expecting a picture, probably a PNG file of so much size or something. Do you come along with an identification? Are we allowing anonymous people to come in, or do we want authenticated people to come in? So we need this data, and then we need, which is not the subject of this talk, which is what will be left to developers. So once all of this has come in, now Drupal takes over. What functions do you write to do what with this image is up to you. So creating the upload functionality is up to you. If a username and password comes in, logging in is up to you. If you login web service request was not created for you. So in other systems, because I tried simple web services or some Perl module, and it was very haywire. I mean, creating a web service endpoint is writing a lot of code. In Drupal, just like some of the most useful hooks, it's just about declaring a structured array. So what do is you use this hook called services resource, and this is your module name. You prepend the hook with your module name, so you write a function. How many of you are aware with custom module development? Matlab ekdam basic. Okay, others are not. So what happens in Drupal? There are 19,000 modules. Somebody created them. You create your own new modules. If I have 10 web service requirements, I would probably create a new module. I would call it ABC. So modules have a machine name and a human readable name. human readable name makes sense. I would call it Instagram web service backend or something, and machine name I could say it something something simpler. Say I call it ABC. Or now, the way modules use functionality provided by Drupal, extend functionality provided by Drupal or by other modules. For example, I just turned on the services module. Now the services module exposes some of its functionality via hooks, just like rest of the Drupal does. Imagine execution of a web page or execution of any program on a timeline, a sequential series of events. So first this piece of code runs, and then this happens, and then this function is called. Now imagine a system that allows you to hook into this timeline. So there is this linear operation going on, and data is transforming. When this function is called, more data gets accumulated, and when this function is called, some of this data is changed, some of this data is themed. So imagine this is on a timeline. Now imagine a system that allows you to hook into it. And say, in this timeline there were 10 points, and at point number 2 I want to do something else. I want to be able to grab this data and then add some more meat to it. In the process of adding that more meat to it, now imagine that process as a timeline itself. So in the series of 10 steps, you hooked on to step number 2, and then you tried to do something else, which was 2 dash, 2 double dash, 2A, 2B, something else. These are your modules, which are trying to hook into core Drupal series of events and do something. These modules itself, at their own steps, can allow other modules to hook in. Did that make sense, or was it all blabber? That made sense, right? So what happens is, service module gives you these various endpoints which you can extend. And in Drupal, extending an endpoint, okay, don't confuse this with the web services endpoint. I'm very sorry to use this vocabulary. So we call them hooks. These points in the timeline of what happens when a web page is put together. So it does not happen in a fraction, right? So in this timeline, these points where you can change things around, where you can intervene, we call them hooks. And the process of intervening is called extending a hook. And when you extend a hook, typically modules do that. Modules extend hooks and do their own stuff there. While doing their own stuff, that itself can be imagined as a series of events, which can be hooked on to subsequently. So one module can work with another contributed module. That's the picture I'm trying to paint, so that I can explain this code. So there is this hook called services underscore resources. This is the hook's name. And this hook is made available to you by the services module. If that module, we turn that module off, this hook would not function. How do a module A, the module that you wrote, abc.module, how does that module implement a hook provided to me by the services module? Very simple. It just defines a function which has the format module's machine name underscore the hook's name. All you got to do to implement a hook is call a function module's machine name underscore the hook name. So here we are calling the module services test resource, and we are appending that to the hook's name with an underscore, and we are defining a function by this name. So now the services module, when you turn this module on, each hook has its own time of popping up its head and doing something. Like I said, in the series of things that happen when a Drupal web page is assembled together, or events happen in Drupal, imagine them as a series of steps, and each step can be hooked onto. Not every request would have each step involved. So you can imagine that hooks would get fire or come into play when something specific happens. This particular hook, services resources hook, is fired when, say, first you install the module at the first time, and then it goes into this function body and does something with this data. It stores what to do. It identifies, in this data you are trying to declare where should my door be, how many doors, how many web services endpoints, what should we call them, would they receive get request or a post request, what kind of parameters would they receive. All of this is just presented in a human readable, my mom would understand kind of a array fashion. So look at this. You give the name, primary key. This is a nested array, associative array. So top level key is your resource name. So here I give it service test. And then this part is not very well documented for those who have worked with Drupal web services. There are 4 types of predefined secondary keys: retrieve, actions, post, get. If I under services test, if I write a retrieve request here, I think it would, I'm not too sure, I'll have to check. I think it would just accept get data. If I write retrieve would just take get data, and update would accept post data. So basically, along with your request, along with your HTTP request, the input has to come as in the post body, not as a part of same parameters appended to the URL as a get request. Actions, again, as a post body. So you wouldn't know this, and this is not documented. You have to look at the code for this. Typically, I would not use retrieve. All my use cases, I would use actions. And then I would use, in fact, targeted actions. Now, say for now, we will enter into everything else. For now, I'll just talk about, say, targeted actions. So what I'm doing, I'm declaring a function which is essentially extending a hook. Inside the function, I'm just putting together an array and returning it. And by means of putting together a structured array and returning it, I'm telling to Drupal the essential details of my web service. So I'm telling to Drupal what the name of my web service should be, endpoint. In this case, it is test. We are just talking about this subsection, targeted actions. So my web service, whatever API endpoint I give through the interface, where we gave API, I could have given v1 or v2. What follows that? Slash something. So slash what? So I would say slash test. This is what this key tells you what will come there. And then what should be the access? We will go to callback first. So when along with the key callback, you give a string, which is your way of saying that when this particular door is knocked, API slash site.com slash my resource name, resource path, which we gave API for example. So site.com slash my resource path slash my web service endpoint text. When that door is knocked, which function should I call? So that's the argument, that's the value of your callback key. So what now in this file you would expect a function by this name. And when that particular URL is hit by a Java site or by a mobile app, this particular function on your Drupal site would be called. So then you have a function of this kind. Now, interestingly, we made our resource a session-aware resource. So we said user authentication awareness should be there. We checked that box. So what happens now is Drupal has a very robust permission and user mechanism, roles permissions mechanism. Inside Drupal, there are functionalities which are wrapped around by permissions, and only those roles who have a particular permission can access a functionality. Now, how would you know who has roles? Users have roles. How would you know a user has a role if the user is either he is an anonymous user, so he has not identified himself to the website yet, he has not logged in yet, so you have certain permissions allowed to the anonymous user, or if he is an authenticated user, you can define different kind of roles and then give them permissions, etc. When we have sort of a requirement where we want to provide controlled access to our endpoints, and based on Drupal roles, or we create roles for them on the site, that's when access callback is useful, access argument is useful probably. Even if I'm using anonymous requests, but I have certain requirements. Probably I do not want my API to be used outside India. So I want to check if a request is coming in, somebody is knocking at my door, I would see their IP address, and if it does not belong to India, I would not bother calling my callback function. I would not bother doing some work. I would just see कि इस बंदे को I do not want to allow this particular request, and I would deny them there. I would throw an error message back, your country not allowed, sorry, something 403 error or something. So before the callback function is called, the access callback is called. And the default access callback is user underscore access. That's why I went into roles. So access callback is a function. So when that particular door is knocked, first your Drupal would go to that access callback function and check whatever the access callback function is expected to return a true or a false. If a true is returned, Drupal would proceed further. If a false is returned, it would not. If you remove that access callback, default access callback is user underscore access, which is a function which accepts a permission name, permission string. In Drupal, there are already permissions, if you are aware of it. So you just have, then you do not require this argument, you just need access arguments. And you can say in an array, you can declare permission, one permission or multitude of permissions. So if a user has all these permissions, it would go through. So access control is pretty easy here. In fact, the Drupal menu routing mechanism works in the same fashion. Services mechanism works in a similar fashion. And then you have arguments. So this part you declare कि when you knock my doors, what data should you come with? And you can tell interesting details here. So what type of data it is? Integer. So now if I make a call to site.com/API/test and I pass it a data by the name arg1 in the post body, I say arg1 equal to Sumeet, I would get an automatic error message returned to me, so some data mismatch error or something, because Sumeet wasn't really an integer and Drupal was expecting an integer. So this particular part is not coding really. It's just telling your requirements in a structured fashion. Code goes in here, about which we are not going to talk anyway. What else? So this is very important, optional. So you could say here true or false, and your web services would throw errors if missing data is there. So you do not have to go into your functions and check for every data being present. If you have an API endpoint which is expecting 10 pieces of data and all of those are required, if a user missed 5, you do not have to, because in Perl I have done this. I would check for data, this present and this present, then show this error, otherwise all of that. Here you can pretty much say, I have these 10 arguments and this is optional. For example, you want to fetch tweets. You have a Twitter API, twitter.com/something, fetch tweets, and it expects a username and a password. If just provided with those, it would give you top 10 tweets. If you also give a timestamp, start time and end time, which are optional, it would return you tweets between those times, for example. So certain parameters are optional, certain are not. You could just define them there, and they just work out of the box. Let's go to some of the examples now. I'll go back to my agenda. So your document is making authenticated requests in Drupal. So you don't have to do anything. I mean, your logic just simply does not change. Implementing authenticated, I have worked on Google Apps. So using Google App Engine and Open Social. Back in the Orkut days, there was an Open Social engine and I was trying to make an app for it. And there you have to use web services for sure. That's the first time probably I tried and gave up. And on Google App Engine, I would make these apps, and every web service request, I would have to check if the request is authenticated, what access it has, etc. In Drupal, you do not have to do that. I check my resource and I say कि all requests coming through this resource, they have to check for whether these requests are authenticated or not. Just do that. When you have done that, in your function, the $user object would be present as if the user is logged in. This is the same way Drupal would behave if all your operations are happening inside the Drupal site. Why this is exciting to me? Because here, the user did not interact with the Drupal site. They were using a mobile application or a different site or a PHP tool or a Java tool, and they were sending me requests. So if their requests were accompanied by a cookie which has been authenticated with the system, maybe they logged in through some other system, etc. If I just have that cookie in the header, Drupal will do the authentication, load the user object. If it fails, it would throw out an error. If there's no such session cookies there, the $user object would say anonymous user, etc. And it's just available to you like you're operating in a complete Drupal environment. And then you can use this object to check not just access control. Access control, just these arguments here. These arguments here simply work on the permission model. So what user has what role and what role has what permission. If I use my access callback as user access, and here if I give permissions, that's the basic level of permission control that I could do. Imagine if I have to check the user age. So and so API is not available to users between the age 10 and 12. Some reason, I don't know. In that case, in my access callback function, I would have a function by this name. So there's the function. Currently this says return true. Instead of return true, I could say global $user. Now, if it is an authenticated user, all the user information is available to me, and I could check if user age is between 10 and 12, return false, else return true. So it becomes very simple. What have we seen essentially now? I've talked about it a lot. What we have really seen, what was really scary to me. Web services was really scary to me, and I did not know how to write applications which are web service providers. I really never knew that, and I still don't. Drupal has spoiled me, because there are two applications which I have worked on where I have created a bunch of web services, a Drupal system which acts as a server side of the story to a mobile application, and I've created a bunch of web services, and all of them are built on Drupal, and all I do is declare an array and then write callbacks. And my callbacks are normal PHP functions where I go about doing my thing, doing my stuff. So interesting bit is testing them. That's where some Drupalism also comes around. Another one was I wanted to talk about file upload. Where am I? There was a DCD page here somewhere. Anyway, two of the most common things you would want to do when creating a server backend, a web services store for your web services interfaces, consumers, is for them to be these consumer typical requirements. There would be 100 requirements, and two were the bottlenecks. Not bottlenecks, two were a little pain in the ass when working with Drupal web services. One was authentication, testing that, which is really very pretty simple. Another one was uploading files. So I could say something like if I have to create something like a weather reporting system, my Drupal site has all the weather data. Somewhere in the database, say I have all the school data, the Delhi bus schedule. So there is a mobile application where you enter your from location and to location interface. Mobile native applications are just interfaces and some on the site logic to show you things around. But I entered from date and from location and to location in Delhi, and I want to see all the possible buses from A to B. And all this data is not present in the mobile app because this data keeps changing, and we don't want to update the mobile app for some reason, or this data is too huge. It's somewhere on a Drupal site. I write a web service endpoint. How do I do that? Turn on the module, go to the resources page, create a new resource, go to the code, write a custom module, implement the hook. Inside the hook, return a structured array, give it my expected input from location and to location, and give it a callback. Inside that function, I will be able to access this data, the from location and to location, and then I'll write some queries, pull all the buses that run from this to this, and return it. Return it in JSON format or XML or some XYZ format. So these kind of requirements, I mean, it's a cakewalk. We have just seen it end to end. Uploading files, not so much. It's not even a pain in the ass. The only problem was it was not well documented. So that's the reason I had a problem around. The key is when you are giving input to a Drupal web service, your arguments have a name, right? arg1, from location, to location, something. When you are uploading files, your name has to be file square brackets something. And this was not goddamn documented anywhere. Because in PHP, I was not I was introduced to PHP via Drupal. Another reason I'm spoiled. So if you manage form uploads, multi-part form uploads in PHP, files come in a global variable $_ files, and then there is a key name to the array. So Drupal operated around the similar mechanism, and therefore it required your arguments to have, if you're uploading files or photos, your arguments should be, your variable, input variable name just cannot be like Ram or Sita. They have to be files, bracket mein Ram. So these kind of things were not documented, so I thought I'll talk about it. Now, so we built this application for an hospital. In the United States, adoption for iPads and iPhone is like crazy huge, and some other dude built up the UI for this. In a real-time use in a hospital, you can take images of wounds and blood losses, and there is a bunch of Python files. Now look at this iPad application. You take a picture, press a few buttons, the image is uploaded somewhere in the cloud. On the cloud, a Python script from a Stanford guy or something was supposed to execute, run on this image, do some image analysis, and tell you how much blood has been lost and what kind of procedure, first aid procedure to apply to this wound. So it gives you information back on the pad. And nurses and doctors across the hospital use this application. And this is one part of it. There are many other parts to it as well. So basically, it's uploading an image to the server and getting something back. Because there were many other components to it and we wanted to build it fast, we were able to do it in Drupal in matter of days. Test it, foolproof, working condition, matter of days. And I did not know web services to start with. So there must be some file upload here somewhere. Okay, this would be tricky. Not this. I'm just trying to show you around where, how is the variable name used. Give me a second. Show view. Callback is this. Yeah. So there, let's not worry about the details of it. Again, one big function. This file has nothing. It's like, I don't know, some 1,000 lines of code, and it's majorly one big function called the module name _ services resource. That's the function, and it has a one huge array in it. Somewhere in the array, we have a key called getSponge or setSponge, where you are basically, this is an endpoint. So site.com/API or whatever path I want it to be, /Sumeet or /Drupal, site.com/Delhi/setSponge. You knock that door, this callback function would be called, and for better structuring, I could place this callback function in a separate file, not clutter the same file. There were many callbacks, so you place it in another file, and then you give the arguments, what kind of arguments it is expecting. And for a file, you do not have to specifically give a separate argument. If along with the request, Drupal side पे कुछ नहीं करना file upload करने के लिए, very simple. The application that is making the request, it has to tell in the request header that this is a form multi-part request. The data is not post data. So the type of the request body is form multi-part. And then if it's an image file, you will have to turn it into bytecode and then attach the image. All its bytecode would be attached, or if it's a textual data, it would be just text data there. And all this data would come in a variable name. So in your request, you will have the variable name. Make sure that name is files and in brackets something. And that particular file will be captured in this global variable here. So in your function, you would have your file available here, and then you can grab it, move it around using Drupal related functions. We'll not go into those. So that's how image upload is done. On your request end, if you are using Drupal web services as an endpoint, your variable name has to be of a certain fashion. For image files, you have to byte encode them. And that's it. You can capture them in your functions with the global variable $_files, and then you can work on them. How do you test web services? So this is independent of Drupal. Very simple tools exist. The one like REST console. So there are browser plugins. You just go, you declare your request endpoint. You tell what kind of request are you sending, and then you add payload here. So key value data. So if I say something like, in fact, let's turn on something here. We'll go to services and we'll turn on, say, we have turned on everything user, right? And I would say save. So all my user services are turned on, and this is localhost Gauss 2 or something. I would go here. This is like quick testing. This is not automated test. You are not writing test cases here yet. I would also recommend, if you are writing something major, test through code. So yeah, you give your target URL, filling like Facebook form or a survey form. You give your payload, which is like key value pairs. If I am attaching a file, in this particular, I think I'll have to change the key here. This is a plugin, by the way, REST console, you could use it. If I'm uploading a file, so key value pairs here, okay, this is not visible. I can give a key name here and a value name here. So user equal to, say, Delhi, Drupal camp or something, password equal to something else. If I'm uploading a file, in this particular tool, there are many plugins that allow you to test it. I don't know, somehow they realized there is a requirement to change the name. So for each file, you can give a different variable name. And there you are allowed brackets. So it works for Drupal. We use this for testing. Now, things, I was planning to talk about everything about Drupal web services and everything else about Drupal web services, because I personally have worked with a very small subset of Drupal web services. I mean, a very small subset of the potential of Drupal web services, because there are many other modules that work with it. The way I have been exposed to Drupal web services is turn on the service module and write my own custom web service endpoints. But interestingly, if you go to the services modules page, you would see there are 100 other modules that integrate with the services modules, that provide their own endpoints out of the box, that provide rules. If you read a documentation on how to design good APIs, future mobile application developers here, designing mobile APIs, there are many things to take care of, which I, not coming from a mobile application background or a person who has extensively worked on designing APIs, would know. So there are interesting things which other Drupal module allows you to do. Like if you're writing an API, you would probably want to measure where your traffic is coming from, what kind of device, how frequently, what time, all kinds of logs you would want to run. You would want to keep them independent of a certain kind, chain them. So there are 2 web services and 3 web services, and one kind of encapsulates all of them. So from one, how do you make calls to others? You don't have to write specific code. There are modules that allow you to do that. There are rules. Rules is a kind of, not really a Swiss knife, but many modules together, I believe, form the Swiss knife of Drupal, views and many other things. Rules is part of them, and rules is very deeply integrated with services. I've never used it, but the services module page declares that rules is very heavily integrated. with services, and we should give it a try. So I'm open for questions now, actually, if you have any.
Is there views integration with services?
So, yeah, sure.
There's a hackathon which is planned tomorrow. Most of you know that, so it starts at about 10 o'clock.
Can talk to a Drupal system. Now, in the process of talking, if I want something, if I want to say, come to you with a certain request, and in return I would expect an output which you are generating otherwise by views. So, major part of views is two things. One is query building, another is presentation of data. Right? So, query building, yes, it will help because I can call, even if there is no integration, I declare a custom web service and I have a callback. In the callback, all I have to do is pass the views machine name and get the data and return that data in JSON or any other format. Another avenue of integration I see is contextual filters in views, because in views, where do we get output from? Expose filters or contextual arguments. So with my services, I could bring in this contextual filters, and then I could use views for query building and services for an interface, and then accept any kind of input and provide, build these queries using views and then provide the structured data, filtered data as an output. So even if there is no out-of-the-box integration where I have an interface that allows me on a particular page, this endpoint bring data from this resource, even if that's not there, it's just about 4 lines of code. And it's funny to actually call it code. It's just, there's no algorithm there. It's just declaring a function and calling something else. So that level of integration is already there. What else deeper level of integration can views and services have together? I don't see much, but maybe we could discover if they have some. Only place I see they have. The only place I see is probably an interface where they allow you to connect. View, suppose it has currently 2 features. Create a view-based resource, creating service display in a view, and execute any view of the system via views resource call. Okay. So there is a module, in fact. He asked if views has a integration with services. There seems to be a module called services views, and it has currently 2 major features, both of which, even if this module did not exist, were pretty simple to create. Basically, execute any view. So in Drupal, the way you can create service endpoints, you can create views from UI. Just click around some buttons and you can pull in all different kinds of data. So views have a machine name. So executing a view using a views resource. Resource, by the way, is used for services. So views, when you turn on this module, all your views are also exposed as services probably. Good. So this is the part that probably we should all explore about everything else about Drupal web services. They seem to work with pretty interesting modules. And even otherwise, what services module has done to you is made web services a child's play. If a guy like me who was scared of web services back in the IBM days can create a application in matter of days which is being used in real life in hospitals, it's pretty easy. So next time, give Drupal a try, not just when you have to build a web application, also give Drupal a try when you have to build some XYZ system and quickly put together certain web services for other systems to consume. If that is what you take away from this talk, I think that's purpose served. Other questions?
I think all these services we are talking about, it is for RESTful APIs, right?
Right.
But what about that XML and those source data?
No. In fact, I have never worked with them. Services module works with all of them too.
Drupal is only supporting for RESTful API right now. On this module, whatever it is only for RESTful API. So for XML, if the person is using XML as PC, or let's say SOAP, then we can use services.
I'm not the right person to answer. I believe. I'll have to Google around and spend 15 minutes on it, and I believe the same module allows you to work with SOAP and RPC.
Yeah, no, that's just a service. Like,
So how does the callback works then? So in my, if I'm declaring a custom endpoint using my services hook, in there the structure supports HTTP URL endpoint.
So,
Does that apply to SOAP as well? I don't know.
so yeah, when you implement the server, you define the way it takes in. So services would be doing something with a, let's say, you know, sort of a live functionality. And if you want to support that for mobile, you create a service for collecting likes. Server is something that is.
So say if I select XML RPC here and create an endpoint, create a resource, and under that I'm creating endpoints, custom endpoints in my code. Does the structure of my code change? So if I'm creating something like
mobile application is sending a request to this server, Drupal, they need to change the format. Right? If they
Yeah,
are
definitely.
activity,
Yeah, you have to.
Yeah.
So the request body would
So I
change.
think for Drupal, you would not need to change anything. Because the service model, if the service model
Yeah, so the Drupal will just implement the SOAP server. That's it. So it should be a unified API. I think I've used that. So it doesn't show the option for SOAP.
no, it does. I've turned it on.
Yes, yes.
My question is this, because I don't know the SOAP input format.
It's a SOAP envelope, nothing. Like you just
Okay.
give an envelope and you have.
So
and
if
it's
you are
a-
aware with SOAP, probably there you have what I call, I mean, what's the mechanism to know which door to knock, which?
WSDL?
So
Okay.
WSDL is just a directory listing, right? For the
Yeah,
services.
it is
No.
But-
Okay, aware of that. A particular SOAP request, within the request body, does it hold an address of who should take care of this request? Did that explain my question?
That is like
In an-
endpoint. That is
In a
what-
non-SOAP based request, in a HTTP request, the URL itself tells me what address.
Yes, yes.
should I go
it's
to?
like the endpoint, right?
Yeah, right.
Similar on the SOAP also we are having an endpoint type.
Okay, so basically only the request format is changing. Instead of an HTTP request with a URL and a body to hold the data, you have an XML file. And the file somewhere tells what the URL is. As long as there is this address, my implementation, my functions remain same.
Yes,
So
yes.
I could just, instead of now, the functions that I showed, they remain the absolute exact same. Only my request changes. So now I am sending SOAP request, and when I'm doing that, while creating this resource, so I just created a new resource called Delhi. While creating the resource, you have a drop down to select servers, and there is not just REST and XML RPC, there are other modules that you could install and you will have other server types available. So a resource created under that will be able to interpret a SOAP request. My only concern was with the function and body. So if I am using SOAP as an interface or HTTP as an interface, does my function body change? And by the definition of web services, it should not. So it does not. Yep. Any other questions? Did anyone of you ask the other guy where we are going after this? He said we are planning to go somewhere.
Yeah, so we are gathering there.
That should be a valid question. Nobody asked that.
Yeah, I think it's in Vasant Kunj, we're planning to go to a mall in Vasant Kunj.
Okay.
It's nearby.
Mall? We thought something else. Okay. Thank you. And I don't know where you have been using Drupal. Some people were fairly new, but do use Drupal where you have to put together certain web services, and it's. I don't know of a faster alternative or an easier alternative. Some of you might even get bored with it. I got bored with it. I mean, creating 100 different web services is no fun in Drupal. It takes away all the hard work from you.
Hi, Ishan, where's my? Okay, you keep it. I'll take it from.